All right, attempt 3. So, in the previous video, we covered making effects on the client. As you can see here, they're pretty smooth. We emit the dust effect and we enable this effect, and then it's disabled, right? And it all looks pretty smooth. It looks fine. However, when we come into the game, you can see on the left side, that's me, and my effects work properly. However, for this guy's screen, there are no effects that are being played here, right? And for his screen, we see the effects, but on that screen, it doesn't, which is obviously an issue. Now, I'm going to first start off with the explanation. When you create an effect on the client, that effect exists for that client. That's why we're able to see these effects, because in our script here, we are cloning the dash aura effects, which is located in replicated storage VFX, right? We clone those effects on the client. However, we're not cloning those effects on the server. So for the server, if we were to try to return those effects to the server, the server would recognize that item as nil because it does not exist. It's not a real item. However, if we were to create that item on the server and then send that to the client would understand that yes, that is a real item because that is an actual item that exists in the game. So what I'm going to be teaching you is how to create effects on the server so that every player in the game can see effects. And I would like to be transparent about the downsides and upsides about using server-sided VFX. Now, with server-sided VFX, big upside surprise, everyone can see the effect. Now, that's obviously great, and the effect looks relatively smooth to the other players who are seeing the effect, because as the effect is being created and moved and blah blah blah, that is what the players are seeing you do at the same time. Now, issue with that, there is a bit of delay on your side, the person who's doing the effect, because you do an action and then it moves, because you then communicate, the server recognizes your input and movement and then obviously makes the effect move after that point. It makes the effect look kind of laggy, not very smooth, and honestly makes the game look like it's held together by glue and dreams. Now, client-sided VFX, the upsides are it looks really smooth on your side, like really smooth, as you saw at the beginning of this video, very smooth VFX. But the downside, as I mentioned already, no one else can see the effect because you are only creating it on the client. But if you're interested in learning about how to make effects that are really smooth on the user's end, visible to every other player, and are not putting too much load onto the server, I would recommend that you stick around to learn client replication, or at least skip to when I cover client replication, because I believe that is the best way to make your effects that are supposed to be seen by the entire server. Now, if you do not care for creating server effects and only care for client replication, then I recommend that you skip ahead to next timestamp. And additionally, if you didn't see part 1 and only care for client replication, skip to the next timestamp. But if you are interested in seeing why we don't create effects on the server and seeing what happens when you do, go ahead and stick around. First things first, we need to go to replicated storage and we need to create 2 things. We need to create some remotes. The first remote we're going to create is the dash emit remote, and we're going to create the dash enable remote. Then we're going to come over to server script service and we are going to create a server script. And that server script, I don't really know what to call it. Let's call it a dash effects server, I guess, right? And now we're going to need to reference a few things, right? We're going to need to reference rep storage, replicated storage. We're going to need to reference debris, and we're going to need to reference run service. And then additionally, we're going to need to reference our remotes. So local dash enable remote and dash emit remote, called it emote. Now I'm going to comment these and make them actual like references. So give me a bit. Okay, that took me longer than it should have. But the setup for this is going to be very similar to the Dash server. We're going to need to create a table for handling cooldowns. So let's do local on cooldown equals that. And then we're also going to create a dash cooldown. So dash cooldown, let's see, I think it was 0.7. So there we go. And you may be wondering to yourself, if you have experience with programming, why don't you just make a remote event and have those variables be there and blah, blah, blah. I don't feel like explaining modules. This tutorial is already technically like an hour and a half long plus at this point. So if I was to explain remotes and then use remotes, while it would make the process easier, it would not make it simpler. And I want to keep this simple while also educational. So yeah, that's why. Anyways, with this setup, we are going to be doing a little bit of copying and pasting. Specifically, we're going to copy and paste this cooldown function, right? Because we're going to be using that for handling cooldowns. I would like to reiterate here that you don't need to follow along closely with this section of the video. I'm just showcasing that we can do what we did in the previous video by just taking that stuff and then throwing it inside the server script. But if you didn't watch the previous video, that's fine. You could quite literally achieve something very similar by just firing a remote event, and then on server event, you create an effect. Very, very, very simple. All the code that you just saw on screen. But again, you don't need to follow along with this segment. The main focus point of this video is client-sided replication, which we will cover at the next timestamp. And then in that, there we go. And then we're also going to copy these two functions, the emit effect follow and enable effect follow. We're going to copy these two, and that's going to go into our dash effect. I'm going to hide that. There we go. Now Control-Shift-E. Now here, these are the functions we're going to be using in our script. Now you may be surprised how much copying and pasting that we're able to do here, and that's because we're literally going to be doing the exact same thing that we did with the local script here, where we create the effect and then we send the information to the function for that effect. Now, there's going to be some slight differences that are kind of important here, right? The differences are, one, we cannot do render steps. You can't do render steps on the server because I believe it's something about it literally updating too fast or something like that. I'm not entirely sure. I don't remember why, but I just know that we can use heartbeat, which works very similarly. So replace render steps with heartbeat, and that works for run service. And additionally, we're going to need to connect the remotes, right? So we're going to do dash enable remote. Let's start with that one. Control-Shift-E. We're going to do dash enable remote dot on server event connect function, and then that, boom. And inside of this, we're going to need basically the exact same things for the inputs or parameters here. We're going to need for dash enable, we're going to need to copy all of these, and we're going to need to do two things. So remember, when we connect a server event, the first input is the player, or parameter is the player, and then the rest of the stuff will follow. And then at the end, I want to add folder, right? And that's because if you remember from my explanation before, we cannot just create effects on the client and send it to the server. We actually have to create the effect on the server for us to be able to use and manipulate the effect, right? And then for dash emit, we're literally going to do the same thing. Dash emit dot on server event connect function, bam. And then inside of it, we need to make sure that we have player. And then for the rest of the inputs, we need to copy the emit follow inputs. And these can be different names. The names don't really matter. I just copy it just because they're literally, we're using the same exact value. So just to make it simpler, that's why we're doing it like that, right? Now, when we do this, we need to actually create the effect. So to create the effect here, we need to do local created effect equals, folder, find first child effect, and we do create effect equals create effect clone. And we're going to do literally the exact same thing for the dash emit remote. However, there is, oops, I forgot to add folder at the end of there. Can't forget that, right? But something that you need to do before any of that is we need to check cooldowns. And I'll explain as I'm doing it, but what did I just do? I don't even know. Control Shift E. There you go. Okay. So after we've done this, something important that we need to do is we need to make sure that we check cooldowns. Why do we need to check cooldowns here? Now, with someone who's hacking, right, the issue is if you give too much trust to the player, then they can take advantage of that trust, right? So a hacker could send this information to the server, right? When they fire a server, they have to fire the player. The player is going to get fired, but they could fire a bunch of different information, right? And then if you're trusting them, like, oh yeah, that's fine. The only time this is going to get fired is if they actually dash, right? If you trust a player too much in that regard, then they can literally just spam this and just literally overload the server with effects. So what you need to do is you need to do the exact same thing we did in the dash server script, which is we need to do a for loop. For player num in players do, oh sorry, in on cooldown do if players equals player, then return. And then if we don't get that, then we're going to add the player by doing table.insert, and then we're going to do the table name, which is on cooldown, and we're going to use player, right? And then after we clone the effect, we're going to run this cooldown function, and to run the cooldown function, we need to do the table, the object, and the length, right? We're going to do, so on cooldown, we're going to do player, and then we're going to do the length, which is dash cooldown. So yeah, that is basically going to be the same exact thing as well for this dash emit remote. So we're going to copy and paste that here. And the last thing that we need to complete this on the server script is the actual reference to these functions. So we obviously need to do, for the emit remote, we need to do, what is it called? Emit effect follow. And emit effect follow, we're going to use created effect, and then we're going to use the rest of these values. Except folder. We don't need folder in this case. So really we just need these. Bam. And then for the enable effect, sorry, I got thrown off here. For the enable effect, we're going to do dash enable, what is it? Sorry, enable effect follow. We're going to do created effect, and then we're going to do object to follow length, blah, blah, blah. We're going to copy and paste that here. Boom. So now that we've done those things, I'm going to add some comments and I'll be right back with you. Okay, now that the comments are done, I'm going to kind of briefly go over this. We're going to search every player to see if they are already on cooldown. And if they aren't, we're going to add the player to that cooldown. And then we're going to create the effect. We're going to have the effect follow the object to follow. And we're going to wait the cooldown before removing the player from the on cooldown table. And we do that for the top and the bottom for their respective functions. Moving on to the local side of things, we're going to need to add the two remotes that we created here, which is the dash emit and the dash enable. So I'm going to copy these remotes and I'm going to drop them into our local script here. And additionally, so that we can test how it looks, I'm going to go to our functions and we're going to disable or comment out the parent workspace that we do here so that we can see the effect. Usually I'm going to comment that out. So now we're only going to be able to see how the effect looks when we create it on the server. And I'm additionally going to have to fire server the effect here. So what we're going to do is we're going to do enable effect dash enable remote, and we're going to need dash aura effects. But if you remember here, dash aura effects is a clone. And remember, we cannot create effects on the client. Well, we can, but they don't exist on the server. So what we're going to do is a little trick here where we use .name. And .name is going to allow us to basically search for the effect here by doing the folder and then find the name of the effect, which in this case is dash effects.aura effects, right? We're then going to use the exact same things that we do right here, which is HRP 23 blah blah blah, and last but not least, we're going to need the folder name, which is dash effects. Now we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to do that for the dash the dust effect, right? So for the dust effect, we're going to do dash emit remote, and then we're going to do dash dust effects dot name, and then we're going to do the rest of this the same, and then we're going to do the folder name, which is dash effects. Now I believe this should not give us an oh, I'm so stupid. Forgot to do the fire server part of it. I mean, that's kind of important, right? The same thing here, I forgot. Fire server. Now it should work. There we go. We're creating the effects, but you can see it's actually delayed, right? It's only created the dust effect too, but it's not like as snappy as it was with the other effect. And I'm not entirely sure what's going on here. So let me... Actually, I know what's happening here. Oh, okay. I'm stupid. So we're going to need to create 2 cooldowns. I'm just going to keep it simple and call it on cooldown 1 and local on cooldown 2. Gonna copy this, and we're going to replace that with on cooldown 1, on cooldown 1, on cooldown 1. And then this is going to be on cooldown 2, on cooldown 2, and on cooldown 2. There we go. Okay. The issue was where it would work properly, but because the player would be added to the on cooldown function, it would error out, right? Or not error out, but it would be a logical error, right? Because the player is already added to the on cooldown, so yeah, they can't create another effect. But there we go. You can see here that the effect is created and it works, but it's just not snappy at all. It looks quite delayed, especially compared to the previous version that we were using. But you can see on the server, pay attention on the right side here in this case. When we dash, the effects actually look relatively spot on. They actually look pretty accurate. And everyone can see it because the effects are being created on the server. And actually, let me do this really fast. When I dash here, we can see that the server is actually creating effects that exist here. Because these are real. These are not fake effects, right? But they are choppy, right? If we go back and switch, you can see that they follow me so delayed that it does not look right. It looks terrible. This looks so bad. Oh my god. At this point in time, you may be wondering, how do I make effects that look smooth on the client while also visible for everyone in the entire game? And the answer is client replication. Now, client replication is very simply the clients communicate with the server, and then the server communicates with the clients. Now, what does that mean? Essentially, we create the effects on the client, right? And then we tell that information to the server. The server does not create the effect, but it instead tells every client to create that effect. When the server does this, it takes away the calculations that the server has to do, and instead has the clients handle those calculations. So not only will this take away less load on the server, but it will also make it so that the effects are visible to everyone, and they're not going to look choppy on the person who's using the effects, right? So first things first, we're going to need to create a client script, right? And you don't need this server script that we did, but I'm going to keep it around just because I want to use it for comparison reasons, right? So when we do this, we're going to create the local script and we're going to call it client replication. Now in this local script here, we're going to need to request the typical things that we do, that we literally just did. Replicated storage, debris, run service. Those are the things that we're going to need. So I'm going to time lapse me creating those. But now we're also going to need to get the player here, just like we do with our typical local script. So we're going to need to do local player equals game get service players. I think I spelled that. I did it wrong. Players and then dot local player. With all of that done, we are going to need to make a remote event. Now I'm not going to delete our old remote events. I'm just going to make a new one, and this is going to be called actually, we don't even need to do that. Let's instead use the same remote events that we made before. So dash enable remote and dash emit remote. I'm going to use the exact same thing. Now that we have those two created, we are now going to create the on client events. So to do that, it is very similar to when we just do the on server events. Dash enable remote dot on client event connect function bam, and there you go. It is just that simple. And the same exact thing for the dash emit. Done. Now, similarly to this function, we're going to need to copy these two functions here. Now, if you didn't see part 1 and you're just here for client replication, you don't need to do this step, right? We're going to copy these, paste them here, right? Control Shift E. And now we're going to need to create the effect, right? But first, we're going to need to input our parameters. So very similarly to this function, again, like this is like literally the exact same thing. We are going to need the player, right? I'm gonna call them effect player, right? And then we're gonna need the rest of these inputs here. Which again, if you're not following from part 1, you don't need this. You don't need most of this stuff, but it would help to have. Effect player, and then boom, effect object default. Did I do that right? Yes I did. And that's emit. Okay, yes I did. Okay. And additionally, we're gonna need folder, and we're gonna need folder, and we'll need to reference the effects here. So let me clean this up a bit, and then I'll be right back with you. Okay, so now we're gonna do local. What is it called again? FX equals rep storage dot fx, and then I guess I could call it fx folder. Be consistent. Local VFX folder equals rep storage dot VFX, and then local dash fx equals rep storage dot VFX. Now that that's done, we are going to do what we literally just did previously, which is creating the effect. Local created effect equals folder dot, well, connect find first child. I say connect, but find first child, and then effect. And then we're going to do create effect, clone, and then the same thing here. And then last step, we're going to do emit effect follow and then enable effect follow. All right. We're going to do this literally the exact same, right? How many times I've repeated that, right? The exact same. We're going to take created effect. That's going to be the first thing. And then we're going to copy this. And then we're going to paste it here. And then we're going to do the same thing. Created effect. And then we're going to copy this. Except folder. And then paste it here. Very, very simple. Not complicated. And that is basically client replication. We just take the information, send it to the server, and then we send it to the client, right? So we have it set up on the client here. That's our client replication for actually creating the effect. And there's some stuff that we want to do to it, but we'll do it after. Now we are temporarily done with this client replication script. We're going to come back to it later. But I want to go back to this dash effect server script we made, right? Notice how it is nigh the exact same thing, because we're basically doing the exact same thing as this script, the exact same thing, right? Now we're basically not going to be using the script anymore. We're done with it. So for the sake of, simplicity, I'm going to disable this script. So we're not using the script anymore. There we go. And now we're going to copy these two remotes that we used in our client replication script. We're going to paste it here. And now we're going to add two more on server events. Control-Shift-E. We're going to do dash emit remote dot on server event, blah, 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 blah. So I want you to come over to the client replication script, and I want you to copy the following things. I want you to copy for the dash enable remote. I want you to copy all of this, and I want you to put it inside of here. I believe that's the, oh no, it's the enable. I'm sorry. Put that in the enable, and then put this in the emit. At the beginning, add player, and at the beginning of this one, add player, as we've done many times before. After you've input the information there, what we're going to do is we're going to make more tables. We're going to do a local dash emit cooldown table, and we're going to do, oops, that's not correct. And we're going to do a local dash enable cooldown. And this is not like favorable to me. I'm struggling to find a balance between simple to teach while also making it like functional. But the point of this isn't to make the perfect code for your scripts. The point of this is just to teach you how to make client to do client replication, right? So I'm not gonna fixate too hard on it. What we're going to do here is what we're going to do so what we're going to do here is what we did similarly to the dash remote, where we checked every player that was in the on cooldown table, and then if they weren't there, we added them, and then we did this blah 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 blah, right? So we're going to do that, but we're going to do it for their respective function, which is the emit cooldown and the enable cooldown. So for player num in players, for player num players in player in dash, oh my god, and then after we've done that, we're going to copy this and then drop it down here because it's the exact same thing. And then last but not least, we are then going to do dash enable remote fire all clients. And we're going to fire all clients all of this information, and we're going to do the same thing here, but for this respective remote event. Dash emit remote, fire all clients, copy all of this, and then paste it. Okay, so this is what it's supposed to look like, and I'm going to demonstrate to you how you can get your code to look like that, because I made several mistakes in my explanation. I'm not gonna re-record this for the 4th time. Sorry. So basically here, right, you need to make sure that when you're doing the loop, you're checking for your dash enable cooldown table, and your dash emit cooldown table needs to be for this one. They need to be 2 separate tables, so you should have 3 tables. One for checking if they're on the dash cooldown, one for checking if they're on the emit cooldown, and one for checking if they're on the remote cooldown. 3 separate cooldowns, and these codes are functionally the same, but you need to make sure that you're doing the dash enable remote, and this needs to be the dash emit remote. 2 separate ones, and then you have 2 separate variables that are required here, right? 2 separate variable components, I guess, right? Now your client replication script, 2 things. 1, make sure that your references are correct. Mine were not. FX folder, VFX folder, and then dash effects folder, right? These all need to be in check, right? Make sure they're named properly. It doesn't matter exactly what you name them. Just make sure you're naming them properly. And then make sure that you are putting in the correct things. You need the created effect, then the object to follow, and then the rest of the things depending on if they're emit or enable, right? I think my previous code was created effect and then object to follow. That's wrong. It's create effect, object to follow, emit num, and so on. Create effect, object to follow, length, and so on, right? But now what we have here is what it's supposed to look like. As you can see here, the effects are created and then they are deleted, and it looks pretty fine, right? However, there is an issue with this, a very small issue. And that is this. If I come over to my player dash script and I turn this uncomment effect.parent, if I press play here, you'll see that it's creating double the effects, which I mean for better or worse, right? But what we want to do is we want the effect to play 1 time. So to do that, we're going to go to client replication and we're going to add the last component that is missing. And that is to check to see if the effect player is the player. So if player, which is this guy at the very top, player, is equal to effect player, then return. I know, very, very complicated. And we do the same thing here. Copy, come down here, and oh my goodness, I'm just pressing all the buttons. Sorry. There we go. I know, very, very complicated. And now the effect plays 1 time, right? You may not notice the difference here with these effects, but it's kind of important to implement something like that, right? And there we go. The effects look about as smooth as they first were when we first created the effects. And to top it off, if we look on the left side, when we dash, the effects are created very swiftly. However, when we dash when we look on the left side here, the right side here, we can see that the effects are not only accurate, but visible, right? So that's pretty cool. We've taken away the load from the server and we've put it upon the client, and we've allowed the effects to be visible on both sides here. Pretty cool. I don't know where his camera is located. There it is. Pretty cool, right? Now, something I would like to point out is this. No, not this guy. What I want to point out is this. if I come over here on this screen, you'll see that when I dash, well, you see no effects on the server here. Right now I'm showing you the server, and that is because on the server we're literally not creating effects. These effects are not visible, so I just wanted to make that clear. The difference between client replication for VFX and creating the effects on the server is that the server effects, the effects don't exist. They don't exist on the server, but they are visible, which is the important part, as you can see here. Now, because things got a little confusing at the end here, I do want to do some review on exactly what I covered, and I want to go through each script that we used for this video. And before I do that, I'm just gonna talk to the people who didn't watch part 1, or the people who skipped ahead, right? So, alright, so the short and simple of doing client replication is as follows. On your client script, you need to be able to give the information to the server. Now, that could be something as simple as a name, or that could be something as simple as the remote event itself. But you need some way that you tell the script, hey, we want to create this effect for the rest of the clients, right? It doesn't matter where you store it, but it needs to be referenced somewhere. So you fire your remote event to the server. And then on a server, it doesn't matter what you do, but what matters most is that you have some way to check to make sure that the player cannot just spam this. Because if they're able to spam this, then that's a false positive, and then that can cause your game to, a hacker to cause your game to lag and crash. But once you've done that, something like this, you're going to fire all clients. When you fire all clients, you're sending all that information about the effect that you are creating to the client replication script, and the client replication script is going to create the effect. It is just that simple. You create the effect, tell the server, hey, I made this effect. The server is like, okay, everyone else make this effect, and then everyone else makes that effect. Very simple, not complicated, right? And yeah, for the people who came from part 1, finished part 2, and are still confused, I am going to cover the scripts start to finish, just because I know I got very confusing at the end here. So Control-Shift-E. Here's what we do in this script. This script handles our user input, right? In our user input, we check to see if they're typing on their keyboard, and then after that, we're going to be checking to see if they are in the air or they're on the ground when they dash. If they're in the air, then we impulse them a little bit weaker. If they're on the ground, we impulse them a little bit stronger. But we also want them to create the dust effect when they're dashing on the ground. So that's what this is. That's what this is. And then additionally, we have this enable effect. That's our aura effect. So we do those two things in the client script using these two functions. And then we also need to make sure that we fire server our dash remote, because our dash remote is what's going to handle our cooldowns for our action, which is dashing, right? So essentially, we create the effect on the client, we fire server the effect, we create effect on the client, we fire server the event, and then we fire server the action. And now on the the server, we handle those separate actions. Here we check to see if the player can dash. If they can dash, then we check to see if they're supposed to be on cooldown. If they're not supposed to be on cooldown, we put them on cooldown, we remove their ability to dash, and then we run our cooldown function, which then checks to see if they're supposed to be on cooldown, and then asks them to be on cooldown. Lastly, we have these two on-server events here, which both are going to do something very simple. They are going to check to see if the player is on cooldown for this effect, and if they aren't, we add them to that cooldown. Then we add them to the cooldown function to remove them after the cooldown is up. And then we fire all clients that effect so that everyone else can see the effect that we created. Same thing for dash enable remote, except we're doing that for the enable effect and not the emit effect. And then client replication here. Client replication is very simple. We're going to take that effect. We're going to check to see if it is the original player that we're replicating, because then we're going to see the effect twice and we don't want that. Then we are going to clone the effect. We're going to create the effect on the client, and then we're going to make the effect follow the object to follow. Basically the same thing that we do in the player dash script. Like when we do emit effect follow, it's the same exact thing, right? And we do the same thing for the emit effect. It's the same thing, but for the emit values. So I hope you notice that there's a lot of similarities in how we do it, and it's not very different, but it's just like us giving information to different players and giving information to the server so that we can end up creating the effect in a way that everyone else can see it. I'm very sorry if this video got too confusing. I haven't done something like this before and I'm not too good at it, clearly. I'm very open to answering any questions. And the reason why I scripted it like this, if you're wondering why like I'm doing it in a way that's like confusing or like ineffective, as I mentioned several times, I'm trying to find a balance between something that you can understand, anyone can understand, even if they haven't like coded a lot before, while also having it be something that you can pick up things from. The main things I wanted to pick up was in part one, getting an input, creating an effect, and using things like functions and if statements, right? And in part two, I wanted to really establish using remote events and sending information using remote events, right? And in this case, using that information to replicate effects. So I hope you picked up something useful here. And again, any questions you may have, I'm free to answer them in the comment section below. And without any further ado, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.